2017 was the last year my family went on our yearly ski trip. It was a family tradition, and one of the few times I'd see some of my siblings, as most of them are all much older than me and have lives of their own. I remember my mom suggesting we'd stay at an Airbnb that year, as it was cheaper and not far from the ski hill, and we all thought that was a great idea. So my mom, my dad, my younger brother Jackson and I piled into the car to meet my older brother, Isaac, and my older sister Megan, and her husband Drew. I was so excited to see them. Jackson and I jumped out of the car the second we arrived, eagerly looking forward to picking up our shared room. "Race ya!" Jackson screamed while barreling ahead of me. "Hey, no fair." I laughed, chasing him, but just barely keeping up. He pointed to a room on the top floor and motioned for me to follow him to it. I followed him to the room. It was amazing. It had a big loft with our beds on it and a huge TV, plus there was a giant window on the loft level. "This place is awesome," Jackson shouted while climbing up the ladder to the loft. I followed and peered out the window into the enchanting winter forest just behind the cabin. I had the feeling this trip was gonna be amazing. I was wrong. A few hours after we arrived, my 18-year-old brother, Isaac, came. He marveled at the cabin's beauty and charm, and so did Megan and Drew when they arrived. The first few days were great. We all drove to the ski hill together, and my dad would take us boys skiing, while my mom and sister relaxed in the lodge since my sister was pregnant with my first nephew at the time. It was on the third night that something strange began to happen. I woke up at around 2 in the morning, to the sound of sticks or something being thrown at the huge window in Jackson and I's room. I sat awake and listened for a few moments while staring at the window. Even though there was a thin curtain covering the window, the light from the moon allowed me to watch the silhouettes of the sticks hitting the window. They weren't big, they were thin and small, but big enough to make a distinct tapping noise every time they hit. "Dylan," Jackson called tiredly. "Stop with that noise. It's not me, look." I whispered and shouted to him while pointing to the window. Now he was watching the sticks hit the window. "What is that?" he whispered. "Let's find out," I whispered while creeping out of bed. I turned back to see if Jackson was following me. He hesitated, but curiosity overcame him, and he crept after me. I rolled the curtains up and gazed down into the darkness. I couldn't see anything despite the big bright moon, just a stick being tossed from the darkness below and hitting the window every few seconds. Jackson and I opened the window, and the stick tossing ceased. "Hello," Jackson called. For a few moments it was quiet, but then someone responded. "Hey Jackson, hey Dylan." The voice called. I recognized it immediately. It was Drew. Drew has a very thick Australian accent, as he lived there most of his life. "Funny prank, Drew," Jackson said playfully. Then he closed the window and climbed back into bed. "Isn't that kind of weird?" I asked Jackson. "He's just playing around," Jackson replied nonchalantly. I agreed and went back to sleep. The next day was normal. Drew didn't mention anything about the prank, but it was in the back of my mind now. However, that night I was awoken again by the same tapping on the window. At the same time as the night before, I immediately looked over at Jackson. We both got up and opened the window. Again, all I saw was darkness, but this time I could hear Drew giggling. "Hey, Drew," I said, a bit aggravated. "Guys," Drew said between giggles, "come out here." Jackson and I exchanged glances. "We can't, Mom and Dad will get mad." Drew's giggling stopped, and his tone got urgent and serious quickly. "You gotta see this, come down here." "No," I said. "Come down here." Drew screamed angrily. A rock flew from the darkness. It just barely hit me, and it fell through the window onto the floor. Jackson and I looked at each other in fear. Normally Drew was a polite and calm guy, with the ability of natural humor. He never raised his voice, he never took things too far. I knew him as a voice of reason, and he had become even calmer after learning he was going to have a baby. "I'm getting Megan," Jackson cried, and he rushed away, and Drew's screams grew louder and more aggressive. "Get out here now." Drew screamed louder than ever. I fell to my knees and balled up on the floor in terror, while tears flowed out my eyes. That's when I heard Jackson come running into the room with Megan. "Dylan, come down here now." Megan called from below the loft. Quickly I went down the ladder and ran into my sister's arms. Drew was still screaming from outside, and I had my eyes closed while my sister hugged me, and when I opened them I realized the terrifying truth. Drew was standing right there with my sister, but he was currently standing outside our cabin screaming then. The person was still screaming for Jackson and me. Thoughts swarmed my mind. Who was out there? How did it know my name? And why did it sound just like Drew? We all stood in fearful silence. The voice stopped, but then a huge jagged rock as big as my head flew through the window, off the loft, and straight at my sister. Her real husband pulled her back quickly. She still screamed at the top of her lungs, which made my parents and Isaac rush into the room. They comforted my sister, and that's when I noticed the tall disfigured silhouette of something standing on the loft. I screamed while everyone else began noticing it. That's when we all booked it to the car. Everyone piled in my parents' car, and we left the other cars behind. My mom was on the phone with the police for a lot of the drive. They searched the whole house and woods outside the house, to no avail. It's been years since that happened. The baby my sister was pregnant with is in school now, but I still wake up in a cold sweat at night, thinking I heard a voice call me and tell me, "Dylan, come out here." I am traveling around the country in my car. I have been driving for over a week from the city I lived in and have so far slept in my car, to save money. It wasn't until I got to a big enough town that I decided to treat myself to an actual bed that would be comfortable. I opted to choose Airbnb because it is cheaper than hotels. I booked this Airbnb the day before I arrived in the city, so there weren't many options left. I had found this apartment on Airbnb that looked very new and modern, and it was in a great location. The price was reasonable for its location, and it almost seemed too good to be true. The only downfall was that it was listed as a new listing, and had 0 reviews. I figured that the price was low because it was a new listing, and decided to give it a shot. Must be legit because it's Airbnb, right? When I got to the apartment building, it was older looking than I had expected. I later realized that my Airbnb was, most likely, the only renovated apartment in the building, and the building seemed to be in poor condition. It looked more like a dorm hall rather than an apartment building. Anyways, I let it all slide because I wasn't paying too much, so what could I expect? The apartment itself looked like the pics, so that was good enough. Everything went well for the first 2 days. As a female traveling alone, I always make sure to be safe. I don't go out when it's dark, and I always lock the door, every single lock including the chain thing. Anyways, on the 3rd day, I was out all morning and came back to the apartment to change to head to the beach. I had again locked the door including the chain. I was in front of the door watching TV while changing when the door suddenly unlocks and someone opens the door. I am beyond lucky that I had put the lock chain on the door, or else it would have opened all the way. I was naked and no one else was supposed to have the keys. My first reaction was "excuse me," and I closed the door right away, locking it again. I came from the back of the door and did not see who was opening it. I sat in front of the door scared and shocked, realizing that this person could technically still get in here since they have the keys to the apartment. At first, I thought maybe it was the owner coming back after I checked out. But I was not supposed to check out until the following day, so it was not possible. After crying for a few minutes, I recuperated myself and called the owner and told her what had happened. She told me that no one else should have a set of keys other than her and me, and that she is at work, and it was not her. I was scared to stay in the apartment because someone could come in. I didn't want to leave because I had all my valuables there. It was a lose-lose situation. I then called my dad, who told me that it was not okay that someone has the keys, and that she needs to take care of this ASAP. So he talked to her and she told me she will be there shortly with a locksmith to change it and give me a pair of new keys. She then told me that she had only had this apartment for 6 months, and that before I stayed there was only one other Airbnb booking. She also mentioned that it had been sitting empty other than those 2 bookings, because she had been renovating the apartment, which now makes sense why the building looks like absolute shit and doesn't match the apartment. She told me that the only possibility for who that was could be the previous owners or someone related to them. Isn't that illegal? That possibility theory messed with me. How is it possible that I was gone all day every day, and in the 10 minutes I was home during the daytime, someone tries to come in? Did they know I was there? What were they coming in for? If this apartment has been sitting empty for half a year, maybe they did this frequently. Or maybe they saw me come in and tried to do something to me. These questions are constantly on my mind. I just know I am so lucky that I put the keychain on the door, else I don't even want to know what else could have happened. Needless to say, I won't leave a good review, and I won't stay in an Airbnb that has no reviews or seems too good to be true from now on.